Baby, baby.
Hello, listeners of the podcast. This is your boy, NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka no reasonable person would take Sidney Powell seriously. But apparently a lot of people did. So, we're doing a bit of a different story here today. So, in terms of the other stuff I've done and topics I've covered, a lot of it has just been kind of personal opinion, and I've been able to include more other media, I guess I should say, in these podcasts. And for this particular episode, I've been working on something for the last few weeks in regards to something different. I wanted to do something different because over the last few months, I've seen lots of terrible people who exist in the world, who are in positions of authority, and they continue to be in positions of authority despite the terrible things that they've done being documented thoroughly, and have done nothing to refute it or try to fix it or just deny the situation entirely. It happens everywhere, all across the country. We see people in positions of power who have held onto that power for years abuse it, use it in their personal lives to their advantage without consequence, and it bleeds over into their professional settings and affects the way that we judge our government. Here in Illinois this April, there will be local elections taking place all over the state. Many of these races are local. That includes school and library boards, city council members, and mayors. These races often have some of the lowest turnout. Local elections throughout 21 states and in parts of 19 others are conducted in what's called an off cycle, meaning the contests finish sometime other than early November in even-numbered years. Turnout is routinely higher in on-cycle years than those in off-cycle years. This isn't necessarily news in the sense that local elections have smaller turnout, but it is one of those fascinating tidbits that more people want to vote in the presidential election when their vote has the least amount of authority in terms of the aggregate number of voters, as opposed to midterms and local elections and special elections when their influence goes up. Because, as just the way it works, the less people that vote in races, or the less people that participate in races, the higher the stakes. And in terms of these local elections that happen usually around every 4 years or so, we have low turnout. In Illinois in 2019, the last year of our special elections, only 13% of the suburbs registered voters cast ballots in that year's election, the lowest rate for any election since at least 2006. It can't be stressed enough how important these local elections are to our fellow citizens. It's important to note that when you go to vote in April, you may not know all the candidates on your ballot, but you have time to look them up. And this particular story is about one particular person who is on the ballot for mayor in a small town in Illinois. This is a story about that small town, 45 miles west of Chicago, a tale of bad behavior from one elected official. This is what I'm calling burning from the inside, corruption and bad behavior in a small Illinois town. About 40 miles outside of Chicago, there is a small, quiet suburb called Geneva. Geneva is a city, and it's the county seat of Kane County in the state of Illinois. It's part of a tri-city area located between St. Charles and Batavia. As of the 2010 census, it had a population of 21,495 residents. And in 2019, the estimated population was 21,809. The area has experienced rapid population growth from the late 1980s through the mid-2000s as the Chicago suburbs spread to the west. Geneva is a popular tourist destination with its scenic location along the Fox River and numerous shops and restaurants. There's an extensive bike trail system in Geneva, including portions of the Fox River Trail and the Illinois Prairie Path. Geneva has an active historical society, the Geneva History Center, located in downtown Geneva, as well as the Fabyan Windmill, an old Dutch windmill dating back to the 1850s. The town has received local acclaim, particularly back in 2012 and 2013, when Bloomberg's Business Week, I should say, out of a survey of 3,200 places nationwide, listed Geneva as the best place to raise a family in Illinois. Quoting the magazine, "The suburb on the outskirts of Chicagoland has many charms," the magazine description reads. The Fox River Trail allows kids and parents to bike along the waterfront, and the Kane County Cougars, affiliated with the Cubs, play minor league ball at Fifth Third Bank Ballpark. Geneva also boasts well-maintained homes with diverse architectural styles. In addition to the public school performance and the safety of the community, the evaluators also considered the local job market, which was gauged by looking at the median income and county-level unemployment, housing costs, commute time, poverty, adults, educational entertainment, share of households with children, and diversity. St. Charles got a national nod of its own in 2011 when Family Circle named it Best Towns for American Families. Also quoted in the story for Bloomberg is the mayor of Geneva at the time, who is still the current mayor, Kevin Burns. As listed in the article, for Mayor Kevin Burns, the magazine's ranking of the city affirms what people who live there already know. Geneva is a great small town. It validates what we've all known for many years. Geneva is a special place. Geneva will always be a community that strives to be a small town. And I think that pursuit of a small town feel probably attributes to its greatest characteristics. On a personal level, I've been to Geneva more than once. It's a great little town, lots of shops, lots of restaurants. Been there for Swedish Days, which is a festival they have every year when we don't have a pandemic to celebrate Swedish history. And fun tidbit, The Road to Perdition, starring Tom Hanks, Paul Newman, and Jude Law, was filmed in downtown Geneva. So there's a lot going on there. However, the reason we're talking about Geneva is because of the man quoted in the article, Mr. Kevin Burns. I was notified by an associate of mine that there was an election going on in April, and that there was a particular person that should be looked into, because this particular person apparently has some personal issues that led into the political issues that resulted in a whole host of controversies. And I think it's important to examine these things, because with these local elections, when maybe 12 or 13% of the population is deciding who's in charge, the personal characteristics of the people running matter. So in order to look into this situation, because if you were to just go to either the Geneva city website or local papers like the Daily Herald or the Kane County Chronicle, most of the information that you'll find about Mayor Burns is either a series of endorsements, even though he ran unopposed multiple times, debates between him and other people running for mayor in the last several elections, and different initiatives going on throughout Geneva. But there is a different side, a darker side, that I talked to one particular person about who's been covering this for years. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the person that I interviewed for this podcast, who has had extensive coverage of the Mayor of Geneva.
I'm Jeff Ward. I am a former 8-year opinion columnist for the Suburban Sun-Times newspapers, including the Beacon and Courier News. I continue to write on my own on thefirstward.net. I am an author, having written So You Want to Win a Local Election. I'm also a campaign manager with a reasonable 80% success rate.
Jeff Ward, columnist, campaign manager, and local journalist, has been covering the Mayor of Geneva along with other local politicians, but in particular coverage the Mayor of Geneva, Kevin Burns, for nearly a decade now, and has an extensive history with the mayor and goes back quite a ways with him.
To go way back, Kevin originally, the Mayor Burns, I guess I should say, was one of my best sources. We were good friends, but as it is with most narcissists, you start to see the chinks in the armor when you're with them long enough. And when I started seeing kind of the personal vendettas, the capacity to say one thing and do another, the constant, and they still are constant battles he got in with various Geneva groups that it's just, why would you want to get into a battle with them? Then I learned about, his court battles with his ex-wife, his many DUIs, the Geneva police let him slide on. And so, this wasn't, Steve, this wasn't an intentional thing. It's right. Sometimes you go where the story takes you. And as Kevin's gotten older, Mayor Burns, I guess I should say, he's had a much more difficult time hiding his dysfunctional proclivities. So in fact, I try not to write about him too much because I could probably devote an entire blog to him. Kevin started and he could hold the narcissistic facade together, he was a good mayor. He made a real effort to help people get along. He made an effort to get along. He made an effort to be inclusive. I mean, I kind of knew the backstories, but a politician that runs somebody off the road on Fabyan, flashes his badge. Oh, we've heard those stories before. And I figure you take the bad with the good. It's the problem is, I've talked to people very, very close to him, and Kevin hates being mayor. He aimed for Congress, and Denny Hastert gave him a job with the U.S. Olympic Committee, raising money for the figure skaters. He blew that out in record time. Then he ran for county chairman. And he went down by 50 points. It's hard to lose by 50 points, even to Chris Lausen. He had a job with the Naples settlement, that went away. So Kevin's kind of backed into this corner by a vast lack of self-reflective capacity. He hates the people of Geneva. He hates this job, but as he said to people, he can't imagine living in Geneva and not being mayor. So that's why he does it.
When it comes to analyzing politicians and the claims that they make, Jeff Ward on his website, thefirstward.net, has an extensive coverage of Geneva Mayor Kevin Burns in regards to not only the personal disputes that were mentioned earlier, which will be covered later in the podcast, but, as a general political conversation. There are things that politicians do, such as embellish their credentials or the facts and try to, get away with presenting the best possible picture. And of course, Mayor Burns was one to do the same thing. So going all the way back to 2013, this particular article is February 16th of 2013. Mr. Ward and Mr. Burns have been in a back and forth over regards to certain facts that were given by the mayor during a meeting about certain proclamations. Now, granted, this was 2013, but in general, whenever politicians tend to lie, those categories tend to stay up for a while. In regards to the particular policies that were discussed, when it comes to the local elections, a lot of it's going to be things like the city budget, city tax rates, the general fund. A lot of it might be considered boring to some people, but it's important because the local government is the one that you're going to have the most contact with, and odds are, in regards to the taxes you pay, most of it's probably going to be in the local area, if it's your property tax or sales tax or food tax. So you want to assume that the local municipality that you're in is not overcharging you for things or not putting themselves at a competitive disadvantage. And they want to make sure that there is a stable budget in place. The mayor made numerous claims, including that, property taxes had been reduced by 30%, which they had not. The general tax rate had declined from things like 0.73 to 0.53. Very small little things that most people probably wouldn't follow up with or even bother to look into, because for a large part of people, this isn't really interesting. Unless you're into public taxation and forensic accounting, it would be very hard to dig into all of this and, not fall asleep. But for a large part of his career, Mr. Ward has covered numerous other politicians, but in particular the mayor of Geneva, because the mayor of Geneva has gone out and said numerous, policy statements that are either contradictory with the facts or fabrications. Part of this also includes taking credit for projects that Geneva may not have actually had a vested interest in or has little to do with something that they've generated, or things like retail space that are available downtown. Lots of mayors will try to paint a picture of their town as successful as possible, and like all politicians, they may embellish or exaggerate the truth. And of course, when it comes to these small towns and their local meetings, if there's not one person covering the story, usually 0 people are covering the story. So someone like Mayor Burns can talk about different plans in regards to the way that the city budget works, and can make claims that, unless anybody bothers to follow up and fact check, will go unopposed. So for most voters, this will sound like, it looks like the budget's decreased 0.2%. So whatever that means, I guess, is good. Not to mention, regardless of how much is being spent at the local level, how much is being dedicated to certain services versus things like pensions. For most people, this isn't really too much of their concern, so much as the streets don't have potholes and they don't believe the mayor is a straight-up criminal, which in some cases may still be the issue. But for a lot of people, things like this are kind of boring, but it's the normal type of stuff that one would cover in regards to a politician. And of course, politicians can also lie. From February of 2013 as well, there's a story that Mr. Ward covered in regards to the mayor saying that Geneva doesn't have right on red tickets for red light cameras. Mr. Ward, in fact, used the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA for short, and requested data on that, and it looks like 40% of Geneva's camera tickets were going to illegal right terms. And while Mr. Mayor Burns said that initially that they didn't in fact have these tickets, turns out that they never made any claim to the contrary, even though that's exactly what he did. And of course, you can say that things like, we don't write red light camera tickets, and then have, in fact, red light camera tickets, and just say, you know what, whatever, I guess I lied because nobody cared about it. But red light cameras, those things that are actually less effective than not having a camera, that cause more accidents than solve, and usually are just money generating machines for municipalities. If they lie about that sort of thing, it may not seem like much to you and for every person who's maybe driven through it and gotten a ticket, but when it happens over and over and over again, you know that this is something that some municipalities count on for revenue, because it's a way to avoid making hard choices while allowing themselves to claim the mantle of responsibility, even though, as you can look throughout the Chicago Tribune and many other places, the whole entire red light camera industry is a bit of a scam. Part of being a politician also means that you can campaign as one thing and act as another. One of these, as Mayor Burns does, is calling himself a fiscal conservative. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the mayor has repeatedly made claims over the years about the city's property tax rate, the investments being made, and how money has been spent. But like most politicians, these are half-truths, stretched truths, and sometimes straight-up fabrications. In particular, Mayor Burns has long called himself a fiscal conservative, but in regards to the property tax levy, he has repeatedly said that Geneva has to implement the maximum property tax levy increase, or we, quote, lose that money for good if we don't. Now, most fiscal conservatives would try to not have to use the maximum property tax levy increase every time, but for mayors who crave revenue, because revenue is power, they will always try to implement the max amount of space. And in regards to tax increases, another interesting story is that after the city council attempted to stop a property tax increase, the mayor himself kept it alive by voting in place of a missing alderman and tying the score, which apparently is something you're allowed to do. You can just vote in place of a missing alderman. And again, many people may not know or care about these sort of things, but if you do care, you should note that the mayor has the ability to, in some cases, be the sole determining factor for how thousands, if not millions of dollars are raised and spent. And most people probably wouldn't even know. Now, in terms of non-policy items, there have been some personal issues in regards to the mayor's campaigning while in office. Part of that is something that seems like a bigger deal back in 2016 than it is now. But back in 2013, it would have been a big deal if the mayor had used his official Geneva email account to send and receive county chair campaign emails, not to mention saying campaign-related things in those emails. That would be a violation of the law. But sometimes people do that. And I know, everybody seems to do it. Everyone talks about not using state resources for their own personal use, but with things like email, it seems like it just keeps happening all the time. You're not supposed to use your type of communications for politics, and when people do, they're like, whoops, it was an accident. What are you going to do about it? People use it as a political weapon, and then eventually it fades from consciousness. These things happen. There's also just bad decisions and bad contracts to go into. So back in 2014, again, while one of these things that isn't necessarily covered is how your municipality gets electricity, how much they pay for it, and how much you paying for it. Back in 2014, so while Mayor Burns was essentially entering his fourth term, a few of those terms, again, running unopposed, there were towns in Illinois that were signing up with something called Peabody Energy Company. And they were pitching something called the Prairie State Energy Campus under the guise of the Northern Illinois Municipal Energy Association. So essentially what this means is that to make a longer story short, is that bad deals were made by the people in charge in regards to energy. So while most people were paying $50 a megawatt hour, people in Geneva were paying $70 an hour for the same electricity. Now, granted that the mayor of Geneva wasn't the only person to do this. Apparently, a neighboring town, Batavia, was involved in it, but Batavia admitted that they had been quote-unquote misled and snookered. Batavia was required to implement a sales tax and dip into reserves to help cover the cost. Geneva did not. But that's what happens when the mayor feels that no one's going to come after him, is that you can make bad deals and charge people extra money for electricity and no one will do anything about it. During the pandemic, we've seen a rise in, I'm not going to say bad, but we'll say somewhat patchwork and questionable regulations regarding businesses being open. Now, considering the fact that, it seems in America at least, the pandemic playbook that we should have been developing since 1918 has sort of been forgotten about and thrown out the window because pandemics are a thing that apparently didn't happen anymore. A lot of the laws we have based on these pandemics date back to the early 1900s, and down from the state and local level, the ability to deal with public health is one of those primary concerns. But we've definitely seen some people overstep their authority under the guise of protecting citizens from coronavirus. Some regulations have made sense, and some regulations, if explained and can change over time, the public's willing to adapt. But when you're going out on a limb to try to enforce these restrictions, as Mayor Burns has done, so from November of this year, again, through Jeff Ward on his website, during the pandemic, many businesses have closed, and unfortunately, due to whether it's trying to access a loan through the Paycheck Protection Program or cumbersome ordinances created by the state or the local government, many local businesses have been just trying their best to figure out what to do and how to survive. And in Geneva, the mayor has been using the police department to find businesses that go against the restrictions set out by Governor Pritzker. Now, in a council meeting in November, this attempt failed. And it's not as if this hasn't spread in a larger level. There's a restaurant called Foxfire in Geneva that is currently fighting Governor Pritzker's mandates. And, with the pandemic at this stage, this recording being March of 2021, ideally sometime soon being somewhat over through a combination of vaccination and herd immunity, ideally these restrictions would become moot and people can open up their businesses and we can continue to congregate as we used to in large groups. But when you have someone like the mayor cracking down on these businesses and trying to enforce orders that state courts have said are unconstitutional, you really are going to upset people. And it's not just this. One of the last policy things I wanted to cover for the mayor in terms of everything else he's ever done is a recent story I heard about. It's something very specific to Geneva, but essentially the city allocates some money for the Chamber of Commerce to promote tourism in Geneva. it's a pretty straightforward concept, right? The Chamber of Commerce is made of local businesses. These local businesses have a vested interest in the community being safe, clean, affordable, a place where people want to come visit and or live. So they've been given a certain percentage of funding in order to promote the city of Geneva. It's not a crazy concept. Lots of places do it, and for Geneva, it's been a very, very successful formula. As they've seen, despite several recessions and the pandemic, they've seen continued growth. But my understanding, and it's hard to find this in anything that's not just buried way, way down in, transcripts for city hall meetings or in long 2 and 3 hour stretches of city council videos on YouTube, is that Mayor Burns wanted to take the funding that has traditionally gone to the Chamber of Commerce and absorb it back into the general fund of Geneva, and then require the Chamber of Commerce to request funds from the general fund for a program that has already been implemented and successful. So through a combination of using the police department to find businesses that are trying to, understandably navigate the complex circumstances regarding the law and coronavirus and reasonable restrictions, trying to use the city council to find businesses that are in legal challenges, not to mention trying to take money that's been set aside for them to promote the town and bring it back into your control and then make those businesses come back to you, and if they don't, possibly face subjugation of the police department. It's a very small town thing to do, using the city resources at your disposal for personal gain or political gain. If you're from Chicago, this shouldn't be anything new to you. But in Geneva, Illinois, not in Geneva, Illinois, even in Geneva, Illinois, this happens. These are just the policy aspects of the Mayor Burns administration. And, this isn't even getting into testimony to the International Code Commission or the ICC. Probably said that wrong, but I'll have to update that later. In regards to mandating green energy and mandating extensive cost that the mayor testified in favor of, the video of which is no longer online and can't be found. And it resulted in the ICC having to look at their voting procedures because they were concerned about voter manipulation in regards to passing these new codes. And again, you don't think like building codes and stuff like this, the small things, the little things that can make a huge difference in our lives are at the control of people that, if you don't pay attention, will use them to their advantage. And it's very unfortunate. But there's something much deeper and darker here. And there will be one last policy discussion before the podcast is over regarding a current situation, but there is something else that we need to talk about in regards to the mayor, and it's not a policy disagreement. It's about what happens when crimes are committed.
If a mayor generates police reports, it's always a coverage thing or something you should cover.
Through my conversations with Jeff Ward and reading over his website, one of the things that struck me was the allegations of, we'll say, of a personal nature, and how Mayor Burns' personal issues have bled over into his public life. Now, we've seen a series of bad decisions being made and a little bit of a bullying aspect to the mayor, but that's just politics. Politics is going to be like that. However, Mr. Ward speaks of some other serious issues, and this is in regards to police reports regarding the mayor and family members, between his ex-wife and other family members. So I was able to confirm and find these reports that exist, and will be up on my LinkedIn page with certain parts redacted for privacy for certain people. But what follows is a police report taken from February 15th, 2009. And I'm quoting now from the Geneva Police Department report. On February 15th, 2009, at 8:50, Officer Van Dorn and I responded to address removed in reference to a report of domestic trouble. Upon arrival, we spoke with the complainant, Kevin Burns, Mayor Burns. Burns stated that he is currently going through a divorce with his estranged wife, name redacted, and claims that he has a court order that states that, name redacted, cannot have any male visitors while his daughters, names redacted, are present inside the above-mentioned residence. Kevin explained that he did not have a copy of the court order with him, but he would provide me a copy at a later date. Kevin stated that he entered his residence on February 15, 2009 at 8:40 hours, and he discovered a male subject, name redacted, sleeping in the basement of the residence with his wife. Kevin stated that he immediately contacted the Geneva Police Department because he wanted this person arrested for violating a court order. At this point, Officer Van Dorn and I entered the kitchen area and observed the people standing next to the kitchen door. His ex-wife advised Kevin that he did not have a court order, and if a court order existed, that she had never seen it. Content warning: the following passages contain profanity. Kevin stated that there is a court order, you fucking whore. Kevin then pointed at the other gentleman and stated that you pay for my dinner, then you fuck my wife. Tomorrow everyone in the city will know how fucking dirty you are. You are finished in this town. I cannot believe you would do this to me. The man stated, Kevin, your wife told me that you and she were divorced and she invited me to spend the night with her last night. I would never have come to your residence if I had known that you were still together. Name redacted that entered the kitchen and started yelling, Dad, you are the fucking problem and you need to move on. You have fucked up this family. One of the people then placed her arms around another person and then walked back to their room and closed the doors. Officer Van Dorn explained to Kevin that the person was not going to be arrested, and Kevin stated, he cannot leave because I got someone coming that needs to see this. I'm not going to move my car until they see this. His ex-wife then stated that, yeah, you called your parents again. Kevin replied, you are a fucking slut. You fucked the fireman, and now this guy. You probably have a disease. You need to go to the hospital and get checked. You look like a fat whore with fake tits. Kevin then took 2 pieces of chocolate that were on the kitchen counter and threw them across the room in the direction of his ex-wife. The man then exited the residence and waited in his vehicle. The other man, that's not Kevin Burns. After Kevin's brother, John J. Byrne, arrived, John moved Kevin's vehicle from the driveway. The other gentleman then exited the driveway without further incident. His ex-wife then agreed to leave the residence until Kevin collected his property and left. As she was leaving the residence, Kevin stated, you smell like a whore, cunt. The Geneva Police Department has had 5 domestic contacts with both Kevin and his ex-wife. Mayor Burns and his now ex-wife are now divorced, to the best knowledge that I can find and confirmed based on marital separation agreements that were also delivered to me. So, in regards to someone's domestic affairs, I'm generally not one to, pry in because we don't want to talk about people's marriages. And, when things get rough, we might not be in a situation to judge, but, based on the police report that was here, this seems like very abusive behavior to me. This was 2009, yet there's not one mention of this in any of the Daily Herald articles about Mayor Burns or the Kane County Chronicle. Only Jeff Ward has talked about it. And unfortunately, this isn't even the only police report, and it's not even the worst police report.
Someone off the road and flashed a badge, and then it turned out.
Yeah, Kevin got road rage. I think it started. I have the police report. You could, the Batavia police, who I do have a generally good relationship with, tried to tell me that like 3 years after the fact, the investigation was ongoing. And I I said, do you guys really want us to get off on a bad foot? Come on. And they go, oh, we made a mistake. And they gave me the police report, which was kind of funny. But yeah, basically he got into road rage. I think it was started down Route 31, turned left east onto Fabyan Parkway. And he ran these people off the road onto the parkway and then flashed his badge. And this was being thoroughly investigated until he bought his way out of it. And like I said, I think one of the people in the car was a cousin, and they didn't want to pursue it. So he paid them off to make it go away. And you figure nobody does that once, despite what people say about me, and never will. Life is too short. No, but Kevin, no, that was one of his greatest hits, without a doubt.
The other police report that I was able to obtain comes from a 2010 incident that occurred in October. It involves reckless driving and battery. The following again is a police report from the Batavia Police Department with certain names redacted for privacy. The victim advised she was driving her car in Geneva with her boyfriend, name redacted. The victim advised she observed a vehicle tailgating her starting eastbound on South Street to southbound Western Avenue. The victim advised the offender was driving the vehicle and he was so close to her she thought he was going to hit her. The victim advised she pulled into the left lane to turn southbound on Western Avenue at Fabyan Parkway. The offender pulled alongside her vehicle in the through right turn lane. The victim advised the offender was yelling something at her out his window, but she couldn't hear him because her window was up. The victim advised the offender looked belligerent. She also said she didn't do anything wrong to warrant being yelled at, so she flipped him off with her middle finger. The victim turned left to eastbound Fabyan Parkway from Western Avenue. She noticed the offender had also turned left from the through right turn lane and was pursuing her. The victim advised she was in the curb lane when the offender pulled alongside her vehicle in the inside lane. The offender then cut off the victim's car by pulling diagonally in front of it near the intersection of Fabyan Parkway and Carrots Drive. The victim advised she drove up onto the curb when she was trying to avoid the offender's vehicle. The victim's wheel rim was scuffed when she drove into the curb. The victim advised the offender got out of his car and approached her car. He was yelling at her, but she had her window up. The offender went back to his car and returned to her car with a badge. She rolled down her window and the offender began yelling at the victim and witness about flipping him off. The offender identified himself as the mayor of Geneva. The victim advised she told the offender to calm down and not yell at them, at which time the offender poked her in the left shoulder with his finger. The victim advised she was not injured by the poke, it was just insulting to her. The offender never identified himself as a police officer. The offender got back into his vehicle and left the scene eastbound Fabyan Parkway to southbound Illinois Route 31. The witness was on the phone with 911 and gave the vehicle's direction of travel and description: a blue Altima with an algae sticker in the back window. Officers were in the area of Route 31 when the call was dispatched but could not locate the offending vehicle. The witness also said he believed the offender was intoxicated. The witness said he knew the offender to be Geneva Mayor Kevin Burns. The witness informed RO he is related to the offender's ex-wife. RO interviewed both the victim and the witness separately, and their stories were consistent as described above. RO told the victim RO would need to talk to the offender to get his side of the story. RO asked the victim if she wanted the offender arrested if RO determined charges were warranted. The victim advised she wanted the offender to apologize to her, and she wanted him to pay for a new wheel rim. She did not want him arrested. RO contacted the offender and left a message on his voicemail. The offender called RO back within 10 minutes and agreed to come to BPD to talk to RO about the incident. RO met with the offender and asked him what happened. The offender advised he had been... He had been westbound in Geneva and was going to turn left into Burgess Road when the victim also decided to turn left from the left through lane, cutting him off. The victim then continued on Burgess to South Street to Western Avenue. The victim was going slow, and when she crossed over the railroad tracks on Western Avenue, she slowed to almost a stop, causing the vehicle behind his to almost strike his vehicle. The victim continued southbound Western Avenue, and the offender was driving behind her. He said he didn't think he was tailgating her. The offender said he saw the passenger, witness, name redacted, make a gesture out the window, but he didn't know if it was meant for him. The witness denied making any gestures. The offender pulled up next to the victim's vehicle at a stoplight at Western Avenue and Fabyan Parkway. He advised he was flipped off by the victim. When the light turned green, the victim turned left to eastbound Fabyan Parkway. The offender advised he followed the victim's vehicle and blocked its path so he could talk to them about flipping him off. The offender went up to the window, but the victim could not roll the window down. The offender returned to his car to get his mayor ID to identify himself to her. He returned to the car and the victim rolled the window down. The offender advised he and the victim had initially exchanged heated words. The offender advised things calmed down and he told them he didn't appreciate being flipped off. The offender advised he apologized to the victim for losing his temper. She apologized for flipping him off, and they shook hands and went their separate ways. RO then asked the offender to provide a written statement about the evening's events. That statement is attached to this report. RO contacted the victim and updated her. RO told the victim that the offender was willing to formally apologize for his actions. The victim and witness responded to BPD and met with RO and the offender. The offender apologized to the victim. The victim advised she wanted the offender to replace her wheel rim. The offender advised he would replace the rim. The victim asked if RO would handle passing the receipt to the offender once she obtains it, as she doesn't feel comfortable doing it herself. RO told the victim to get the receipt to RO and would forward it to the offender. The offender would then get a check to RO, and RO would deliver it to the victim. And just in case I didn't clarify earlier, R-O would mean responding officer, so I'm just saying RO to make it easier. The witness said he thought the offender was intoxicated because his eyes were bloodshot. The offender indeed had bloodshot eyes, but RO did not detect any odor of an alcoholic beverage on his breath. His speech was not slurred. He did not stumble when walking, and he did not sway while standing. RO explained that the witness had some people get bloodshot eyes, and it's not enough to determine if someone has been drinking. RO further explained that if the offender had been drinking, it would be highly unlikely that he would show up in person at the police department to resolve this matter in a timely manner. RO verified that the victim was satisfied with the outcome of the case. She asked to make a phone call. They again met with RO, and she's satisfied with the outcome and did not wish to pursue charges. So, and in the attachments here, there is a statement from, there is the written statement from Kevin Burns, and then a written statement from the victim. And there is also from the other person that was in the vehicle that was run off the road by Mayor Burns. Their statement is in here as well, confirming what had happened. So, it gets worse because in terms of the information that's here, the victim didn't want to file charges, but the mayor ran a person off the road and then paid the cost of repairs for that person for a total of, it looks like, $530.82 to replace a tire and a wheel rim and for parts and labor for the car. So, while this person didn't want to press charges against the mayor, that's understandable. I mean, it may have been easier, but based on the way the mayor interacts with people, I wouldn't be surprised if it was dropped because they didn't want to have their lives taken out or dragged by someone in a position of power. And again, these police reports will be available on my LinkedIn page as part of the article that goes with it, and there will be redactions in it to protect the people listed on there who were not talked to in this story. And I also want to point out, if I hadn't said it earlier, that I did reach out to Mayor Burns both via his campaign and his official government capacity and received no response for comment. And the thing about this road rage incident that ended up with no charges being filed and the mayor agreeing to pay the damages caused to the car is that from these two police reports alone, where we have at least one case of 5 domestic calls in regards to domestic issues with the spouse, and then we have a police report talking about running someone off the road and then paying their damages later, in which the mayor discusses drinking and it being a problem, is the concern that when someone is able to do these things without much consequence, it becomes easier and easier to do them. One of those things that apparently is a serious problem, at least allegedly for the mayor, as written by Jeff Ward, is that according to sources that he has, the mayor has anywhere between 4 to 8 times been accused of drinking and driving. And whether that's witnesses saw him drinking and going into a vehicle and then driving, or records from police who said that the mayor had been pulled over but they let it go due to the fact that he was the mayor, and the fact that anybody who attempted to talk about these reckless acts of behavior would face either threats from the mayor or the police department at the mayor's behest would come after those who wanted to ask questions about it. Again, here's Jeff Ward.
He's had interactions with his ex-wife, and then according to you, he's had multiple DUIs that have let slide, right? It just seems like a man's personal conduct.
4 to 8. I have eyewitnesses.
Eyewitnesses saying 4 to 8 times he's had DUIs slide off. And like, that's dangerous, right? Because like driving drunk is like a serious offense.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, at last year's Christmas party, Christmas thing, is a speech. He was clearly slurring his words. When he spoke to the county board last late summer or fall, 3 people You know, but if you have been around alcoholics any time, for any length of time, I guess I should say, you can tell when they've had a few. And according to 3 sources, Kevin was drunk talking to the county board, and he basically demanded money for the CARES fund, the COVID relief, and the county board basically flipped him the dual bird, and Geneva ended up getting less money.
Wow.
That's the mayor. Narcissists are bullies whenever you attack their facade, or whenever a narcissist perceives you to attack their facade. I'm one of the few people Kevin Burns is scared of.
So if by now, if you haven't gotten a full picture of the mayor of Geneva, there is one last topic I'm willing to discuss on this. And again, this is all going to be on my LinkedIn page in significant more detail, along with copies of the reports and links to the other articles cited by Jeff Ward, the Daily Herald, and other places. The last thing that I want to talk about is, again, to shift back to policy, because this is kind of a big deal in terms of its impact. There is a proposed development in Geneva called Emma's Landing, a townhouse development that over the last year has been subject to votes in the city council, threats of litigation, acts on behalf of the courts, hundreds of testimonials from residents opposing the project, and yet, despite it all, the mayor continues to force the project onto the residents of Geneva. And to give you a better understanding of what's happening, in discussing this particular development project, a place called the Burden Foundation wants to build 45 townhouses on a 7.5-acre parcel along Lewis Road near the Sterling Manor subdivision in Geneva. Now, this has been subject to numerous questions from the community in regards to if this is a feasible project, for one, and two, whether or not this is going to cause problems in terms of density and flooding. These are the kind of things that happen a lot when you're talking about adding new construction and new residences to a certain area. And again, this particular project, at least in theory, is designed to be for affordable housing. Granted that the city of Geneva had a plan with this original site back in the 90s, and it didn't work out, and they've attempted to sell the land, and essentially when they put out bids for it, only one person submitted a proposal, and it was the Burden Foundation. The Burden Foundation attempted to get the land for either free or a cheap donation, which it turns out you can't do. And while this was happening, after it was decided that they could not in fact get the land for a donation, they were able to pony up roughly the market value of it, which was about $600,000. Now, this is despite the fact that hearings on this were not allowed to be in person due to coronavirus restrictions. And if you go through it's on YouTube. You can go to the Geneva City Council YouTube page to see the meeting and also read the minutes of it. There are dozens of emails and questions from residents about, we already have flooding issues in this town and we're going to build another development. There's going to be less actual green space and more density. Not to mention the questions of what happens if this thing falls into disrepair and if we're able to put all of these families on it. Not to mention the effect on the nearby suburbs. As of recently, the plan has been passed to the Geneva Council, but it's very likely to face litigation going forward. And the mayor has been a big advocate of this, but again, Jeff Ward has looked into it and covered the topic and basically discussed why this particular project is not going to work.
I am not opposed to affordable housing, but what works, as what worked in West Chicago, is they brought in Habitat Humanity. They brought in Habitat for Humanity. They brought in the local churches, small houses integrated in the neighborhood. Yes, the people went nuts. The pastor of St. Andrews lost his job. He's a friend of mine as a result of it, but it worked. You don't hear any complaints anymore. There's no massive police presence required. You have to have the community involved. Emma's Landing is proposed in the triangle bordered by the Burlington Northern tracks along Kesslinger Road, the businesses and kind of the eye clinic, former Kane County Chronicle building, along Randall Road, and then Caneville Road, and Caneville Road is at a diagonal, so there's not much western boundary, but what there is bordered by small woods and a retention pond. So you're going to stack, and I don't remember exactly what I wrote, Steve, you're going to stack, I want to say 80 families in an 8-acre area that's geographically segregated. So, and they're the ones segregating these folks. And history has proven from Cabrini Green to the Robert Taylor homes down the line that when you do that, it fails. It creates.
What we have in Geneva, Illinois, is a beautiful, prosperous town that, like all towns, has issues, whether it's growing pains or dealing with the budget or trying to build new projects or trying to maintain its existing infrastructure. These are all hard, complex, and thoughtful discussions that need to go on. And for the most part, people seem to just think that things kind of work on their own. And it's a very small group of people who really do elect our local leaders, our city councils, our mayors, our trustees for the library board, the school boards, people that you probably see in your community, if you do go out, and eventually will when this pandemic is over, at the grocery store, the movie theater, or the local stores, or even if it's just at the meetings. You know that they're there for you. You know that they're there to work on your behalf. They're there to help you and your community be better. I'm not a resident of Geneva. I'm just a guy with a microphone and a podcast who has time on his hands. But as a person who has been involved in the political scene for well over a decade now, and seeing lots of less than deserving people carry on in positions of power and deserving people crushed by the system or taken out by it or stymied in every direction, it's enough to drive most people mad. It's enough to drive most people away from the process in general because they fear that they won't even be able to get a foot in the door, nonetheless use the system to do the slightest bit of change or to help make a difference in their community. And when it comes to things like the mayor of a town, you may not think much of it if you're in Geneva, traveling, going through the shops, or enjoying the local scenery. You're probably not one to think about the town's local politics, but this kind of thing matters because it's not just the residents of Geneva that are affected by it, it's everyone who sees government working for only certain people. It's certain people who are able to use the system to their advantage, both unethically and illegally. It's people who bully their way into positions of power and bully to keep them in power. It's forcing bad decisions on your residents at a time which challenges are asking a lot of us questions about where do we want to live and how are we going to work and what is my relationship to my government, whether it's my local government, my state, or even the federal government. Does it really matter if a person's personal conduct affects their job? I mean, it seems like we've come to this conclusion where, hey, as long as I like the person and like what they do, a man's personal life is a personal life. And whether it's the Democrats protecting Bill Clinton in the 90s, or whether it's Republicans protecting Donald Trump for the last 4 years, I'm just tired of seeing people excuse bad behavior because it's somebody they agree with politically, or it's someone that's got them a favor, or it's somebody that they just, they don't like the way that they've done, but man, that other guy wants to look at the budget, and I just can't have that. I can't have a reduction in the property tax value because I'm afraid of, whatever else is going to happen. Or, hey, I'm afraid the police department is going to fine my business if I don't cooperate with the mayor, or he's going to take my funding away to advertise for it because he wants more control. People shouldn't live like that. People shouldn't live in fear of an elected official that makes $24,000 a year. People shouldn't be afraid to be on the road with people like this, knowing that they're driving recklessly or drunk, knowing that they could hit you or come after you and just make the problem go away because the authorities are on their side. I can only imagine how many people in Geneva have had a bad experience with Mayor Burns and could not talk about it or discuss it with anybody outside of maybe a small circle of friends and family because they were afraid of professional repercussions or fines or the police department tracking them down and following them at the mayor's behalf. You think this is something that happens in Chicago. We think of this as a daily machine or a political machine type of deal. And it's not one to think that this small little tourist town is where it happens. But in fact, at the local level, this sort of charismatic, narcissistic, bully personality, particularly in a world which very few people decide these elections, people can not only survive, but just dig in and stay there for 2 decades. 2 decades. Now, I've argued in the past against the idea of term limits in terms of people being arbitrarily removed from office after a certain period of time. I just don't think that that's, in my personal research and discussion of public policy, I've never found that to be, it seems like more of a easy way out than it is a reform to the system, whether it's ballot access laws or fixing districts or creating different systems for more people to enter the race. But when people have been subjected to this kind of treatment, when people are constantly told that, to not look into things or to turn the other cheek because, things are going well for 10, 12% of us, so why don't we just let this go? Why not, right? Well, no. I'm not going to let it go. I'm so tired of bad people getting what they want and facing no consequences. I'm tired of bad people being in charge and telling us what we can and can't do while using the system for themselves. I don't even live in this town. And the more I've dug into this, the more mad that I am that a person can do this and just face no consequences. Not to mention have accolades from the local media, who might be the only people that cover any stories about it at all if it weren't for the internet, and different independent journalists looking into different allegations. Would we know any of this stuff if Jeff Ward hadn't reported it, or if, while digging, people hadn't been able to provide me with these reports about the mayor's actions? Because as far as I can tell, none of this has ever been covered in any of the mainstream journalistic areas out here. But people need to know. If people are going to act like this, and if people are going to act like they're above the law and above the rules and can just do whatever recklessness they want and face no consequences, consequences make us who we are. Consequences help us learn from our mistakes and be better people. But unfortunately, with a political system that requires very little to get in and a lot to change, there are entrenched incumbents like Mayor Kevin Burns of Geneva who truly believe they can do whatever they want without any kind of consequence from the voters, from the police, from businesses. They're all afraid to act out. And I think Jeff Ford says it best when he's talking about what makes people afraid to challenge the mayor and challenge the kind of status quo that's happening in Geneva.
Kevin, again, it's the narcissistic facade fading. And the more it fades, your addiction to it gets stronger. And Kevin can't stand the slightest attack from anybody, and he strikes back. I'm the only person in general that slides on them because after 15 years, I mean, about what, 6 we were friends, he knows there's nothing that can back me down. But that's simply a function of time. It's not really necessarily even me. So Kevin will go after anyone who he perceives as a threat, and he will. And that's part of the reason why people haven't run against him. People are terrified to run against him. People are terrified what he might do to them.
If you're a Geneva resident, or you're just concerned about good government and options available, I know this particular episode of the podcast may make you angry and get you down because, all we're hearing is stories of people who have power, who abuse it and get away with it, and there's nothing we can do about it. That is what elections are for. And frankly, it's the only time most of us will ever have a real say in what happens in our governments. And in this case, Mayor Burns is not unopposed. A former councilman and local businessman, Tom Samoyan, is the mayor's challenger. Apparently he challenged him in 2017 and lost, and is running against him again. I hope to talk to Tom in the future. I'd like to ask him about the mayor in Geneva. I'd like to ask him about what he wants to do and things like this. But for the people of Geneva, just know that there is someone else running for mayor. You don't have to put up with this. You don't have to live in fear that the mayor will send the police on your business, that he will berate you in public or in private, that he may physically hurt you while driving his automobile. You don't have to live like that. You don't have to deal with that. You, in a very short amount of time, this April 6th, have the ability to change that. And again, I'm not from Geneva. What do I know? I'm just a guy with a podcast. But to me, it seems like if given the opportunity between somebody who makes threats and someone who doesn't, somebody who has multiple businesses as opposed to somebody who has only one job, someone who's known for building in the community as opposed to bullying people in the community, the choice seems pretty clear, doesn't it? And it's not just Mayor Burns in Geneva, it's thousands of mayors and thousands of people across thousands of towns who are only subject to 10 to 12 to, if we're lucky, 20% of the voting public. You are the only accountability between bad local governments and real authority in the process. You, the voter, are the one that decides this. And I know, after 2020, after all that election nonsense, you're tired of hearing about it, you don't want to deal with it anymore, the pandemic's on your nerves. Maybe you've gotten a vaccine. Maybe you're waiting on the second shot. Maybe you haven't gotten it at all. Maybe you're unemployed. Maybe you're just angry at the world in general and you don't know what else you can do. But there is one thing you can do that is always proven to be effective, and that is vote. That is organize, that is talk, and that is demand better from your leaders. Demand better from the people who govern you, because this is America and we live on the consent of the governed, and if the governed no longer give their consent, then they can choose to have different leadership. And frankly, the case is pretty clear if you ask me. I want to thank Jeff Ward for taking time to speak with me. You can find more about Mayor Burns on his website, thefirstward.net, which has extensive coverage. You can also check out my LinkedIn page for the long-form version of this podcast, where it's not exactly written out as a transcript, but the same sources, the same information is on there, along with the redacted police reports and links to different videos and different articles in regards to conversations that were brought up here today. Just remember, you may not care too much about these off-year elections. You may not know who your local mayor or city council or school board or library board is, but I highly suggest you find out. I highly suggest you read the papers, go to their websites, listen to different debates, get as much information as you can from as many sources as you can. Use your best judgment. Go forward and exercise your rights.